They're not talking about the best of them. They're just talking about the rest of them. Not the worst parts, but the best parts. This is the best of the rest.
Hello, and I'd like all the people back there to know that our subway system is still the safest and most reliable means of public transportation. This is Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at superhero movies that were poorly received upon release and only talk about the things we liked and what the movie does well. It is sometimes a challenge, but it's always a good time. And today we are talking Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by the man with a nuclear arsenal of comic book knowledge, Andrew Williams. Are you ready to jump into this one, Andrew?
Yeah, this is a big one. I say that all the time now, I feel like, but yeah.
But this is definitely up there. Any list of, quote, worst superhero movies of all time, worst comic book movies, it's going to have Superman 4 on there somewhere, sometimes at the very top.
Yeah. This is the film that effectively, in many ways, kills Superman on the big screen for almost 20 years.
Right.
So, yeah, quite a legacy.
Yeah, I mean, I've even seen it show up on lists of like worst movies of all time, period. Yeah. It is universally panned and mostly hated. But today, we're going to talk about what it does well, what we like about it, what makes it worth watching. Because believe it or not, there's some good stuff, even great stuff in every movie out there. That's our mission statement. That's our goal. It's our journey. And as our intro says, it is sometimes a challenge. I think we might be a little bit challenged this episode, but I've got some good stuff to talk about this movie. There's some stuff I enjoyed for sure. And I'll go ahead and say, I think it's better than its reputation.
I agree. I actually think, yeah, I think watching it back, it wasn't nearly the arduous task that I might have thought it was.
Let's set the stage a little bit. This movie was released July 24th of 1987 on a budget of just $17 million. At the box office, it brings in $37 million, by far the lowest grossing of this series. Still technically profitable. However, critics just were not having it. It holds an 11% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, it gets eviscerated pretty hard. It's made, like you said, it's made for 17 million, makes just under 37 worldwide. By comparison, Superman was made for 55 million and made over 300 million worldwide. And by further comparison, Batman, which comes out just 2 years after this, which is kind of crazy to think about, costs 48 million and makes over 400. So obviously the diminishing returns are in full effect here. Released in July of 87, 2 days after I was born, actually. So I don't think I caught this in theaters. I think the hospital logistics prevented me from getting there.
They didn't send you a screener.
Yeah,
a DVD in 87.
It's like a reel-to-reel that I had to watch on a projector. But no, yeah, this is not a success. The general legacy is, like I said, it kills Superman on the big screen for almost 20 years.
A lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. We mentioned the budget was only 17 million. It didn't start off that way. It was supposed to have a still low budget, but reasonable budget, somewhere between 30 and 40 million, but it gets slashed very early in production, which causes a lot of rewrites and scenes to be flat out dropped.
I think it's something canon, apparently. So the kind of backstory of how this comes to pass is this movie is actually also the first of this series of Superman films to not have any involvement of the Salkinds. They were the producers that bought the rights back in the 70s and kind of shepherded Superman 1, 2, 3 and Supergirl to the big screen. Supergirl was basically the 1-2 punch of the failure of Supergirl and Superman 3, plus another film they'd made called Santa Claus the Movie. Pretty much had them in kind of some dire straits. And after those two failures of Superman and Supergirl, they were looking to get out. They were like, all right, I think we've done everything we can with Superman. So they sell it to the Cannon Group for like $5 million. And they're putting a lot of work into it. And like you said, though, once filming gets ready to start, the budget issues of Cannon, who had something ridiculous, like 30 projects going on at the time, set in, and that budget gets almost halved. And it definitely shows in the final product.
Yes, I think it's safe to say that this movie does not look expensive. prior to what I say on almost every other episode.
It does not
The
look
movie
expensive.
looks like a $17 million picture.
Mhm.
Now, it's written by the writing team of Lawrence Connor and Mark Rosenthal. However, the story was actually originated by Christopher Reeve. It's a bit of a passion project for him.
That was actually one of his. He himself was hesitant to return in the wake of all the stuff that happened with Superman 3. He turns down a cameo in Supergirl that he was supposed to have. And ultimately, by the time Superman 4 is ramping up, he's pretty disinterested. He's kind of like in the same boat as the Salkinds, kind of like, I think we've done all we can with Superman, but Cannon gives him a hefty payday. I think it's like $6 million.
Finally, this man finally gets paid what he deserves to be Superman. Yes.
He gets director approval, he gets script approval, and he also gets funding for a passion project of his called Street Smarts, I think it's called. So it's a lot. It's basically going to him, or Street Smart. A lot of stuff given to Reeve to get him to come back for this, just to give it, I think, some authenticity.
I mean, they knew you can't do a Superman movie without Christopher Reeve at this point. It's
your only chance of being a success. If you had cast somebody else and called it Superman 4, you're just guaranteed. I mean, don't get me wrong, the box office on this isn't great anyway, but like you're already dooming yourself to
you can't just put Val Kilmer in there and expect the audiences to come see it.
Let's not talk about what we missed out on not having Val Kilmer as Superman. But yeah, and then beyond that, just a troubled production, pretty much almost immediately.
Now, I mentioned the writing team, Lawrence Connor and Mark Rosenthal. Before this, not a ton of credits. The most high profile probably being right before this, they wrote The Jewel of the Nile, the sequel to Romancing the Stone. Afterwards, go on to write tons of stuff. Still writing credits on things like Star Trek VI, Mighty Joe Young, Mona Lisa Smile. And Lawrence Connor specifically has a high profile writing job on both The Sopranos and Boardwalk Empire. Two shows that I've never watched, but I know they're popular. So good for you, Lawrence.
And actually, Lawrence has also co-written the upcoming Sopranos prequel with David Chase, The Many Saints of Newark. So he's still out there working. But yeah, these guys, pretty much any movie they've written outside that kind of exception was as a team. The stuff you mentioned, Legend of Billie Jean, Mercury Rising, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, like 10 years ago, Nicolas Cage. So they're out there and they're working. They pretty much are almost always a team. When it comes to film work. But like I said, they kind of craft the story of this with Christopher Reeve and kind of come through and deliver this final script, which, again, the film script was apparently like 40 minutes longer. So we lost a lot there.
Yeah, Mark Rosenthal did a DVD commentary in 2006 that a lot of the research I did comes from that commentary. Apparently he's no holds barred and really digs into the story behind this movie and what could have been, if you will.
The budget seems to be the common factor amongst almost anybody that speaks about this. They pretty much highlight that the intensely truncated budget leads to a lot of the film's issues, which, having watched it, I think definitely tracks for the most part. And then just, it all shows.
The movie is directed by Sidney J. Furie, who is no lightweight. Their credits go all the way back to the 50s, lots of high-profile movies. Honestly, not a ton of things that I've heard of, but they've done a lot of stuff in both Hollywood and British cinema. So It's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse.
Sidney J. Furie, known for probably the biggest film is The Ipcress File in 1965, which is the first of Michael Caine's Harry Palmer films, which were loosely based off of Len Deaton novels. Len Deaton being a very prolific espionage spy type writer. And Michael Caine ends up playing that character several more times in the immediate aftermath, and then actually returns to the character later in like the 90s. So has a bunch of credits there. But that film, The Ipcress File, very well received. Very, very still seen generally as one of the best spy films of all time. That level of reception. His later career kind of turns a lot into low budget, made for television type stuff. One of the films he directed that I've actually seen is the Rodney Dangerfield vehicle Ladybugs, which features a boy infiltrating a girls' soccer team that I am 100% certain has not aged poorly whatsoever.
At all. I watched
I'm
that
sure
movie.
it's perfectly fine.
I watched it a lot as a kid, but you're right.
Yeah, it
Probably
did.
wouldn't
But like,
fly
I'm
today.
sure rewatching it now, I would just be like, oh dear God.
Woof.
But yeah, like a very varied career definitely comes into some low budget stuff as this time goes on.
Now, this movie was nearly directed by Wes Craven, which
Yes, who
would
was
have been
hired.
interesting. Apparently, that breaks down because Christopher Reeve and Wes Craven did not get along. I couldn't find much more information beyond that. I think it, if I had to guess, would probably be different ideas for how to portray the character on screen. I think Christopher Reeve is very specific, and Wes Craven might have been trying to do his own thing with it that probably didn't jive. But that's just me guessing.
Well,
Andrew,
and like this is Wes Craven already after Nightmare on Elm Street. So I just feel like he's a very different type of director of what you're looking for. I don't even like the idea of Wes Craven directing a Superman movie is just like alien to me. Like I don't even know what that would look like. Like it's a very strange thing. So yeah, a lot of, and apparently Richard Donner has claimed Reeve asked him to come back as well, which I think he says that on the commentary on the Donner cut in 2006. He says that he asked him to come back, and obviously he said no.
There was even talk of Christopher Reeve himself directing it, which it looks like he did a few scenes, but ultimately decided not to go that route because of his inexperience as a director, which is absolutely the right move. With the way this budget was slashed and they had to pivot the way that they did, thankfully it was in the hands of a capable director. It could have been much different with a director that maybe was not experienced and didn't know how to pivot that way and make the changes and call the audibles. I mean, it could have been a real disaster. Christopher Reeve said in his autobiography that this was pretty bad for his career. He points to this movie as being hard to recover from. And I think if he had helmed it as a director, it would have been that much worse as far as his reputation in the industry.
Oh, absolutely. Because like you think about Reeve's high profile films after this. I mean, they're few and far between. And it really is, I think, really looking at a first example of like typecasting. I think he just got stuck as Superman. I mean, and don't get me wrong, you're still the bar by which everyone's compared, but I mean, I'm trying to think of high profile things he did after this. And like, I remember it
was projects that we know of just because it's Christopher Reeve. He famously did that before his accident, did that made for TV movie for HBO where he plays someone that's a quadriplegic and or pretends to be. I don't remember the plot, but it ended up being kind of an eerie, similar to what happened to him. And I know he did that Rear Window made for TV movie where that
was after his accident.
Right. Where they kind of reworked the script to have him actually be a paralyzed character versus the original where he's just in a wheelchair because of a broken leg.
It's unfortunate because the man is a great actor. Again, I'm going to recommend all of you watch Death Trap with Michael Caine. A great against the grain role where you kind of see his range. But yeah, I do ultimately think at the end of the day, him not directing this was the right choice. I think he just like you said, when you're dealing with slashed budgets, somebody that's just got even just the history of having worked on decades of films is going to be able to pivot a lot better in those scenarios.
Well, let's talk about the movie we ended up with. Here's what happens in Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. After a young boy writes Superman a letter asking him to intervene in the global arms race, the hero declares he is ridding the world of nuclear weapons. Lex Luthor, hot off of his prison break, sees an opportunity to finally defeat Superman and tricks the Man of Steel into creating Nuclear Man, a powerful being created from Superman's very own DNA, who also draws power from the sun. Now, Superman must defeat not only his arch nemesis, but a bizarre version of himself as well. First things first, you like that? Bizarre?
I saw what you did there.
First things first, we're going to talk about the cast of this movie. And Andrew, as is tradition, we give someone the Mark Strong Award. The Mark Strong Award goes to a performance that is so good, it elevates the quality of the entire film. Just going through the motions here because we all know who gets it. Andrew, who gets your Mark Strong Award?
John Cryer as Lenny Luthor. No, I'm kidding. No, you give it to Christopher Reeve. Christopher Reeve as Superman is the anchor of this film. Is it all working? I can't say that it is, but he's still passionate about this role. You can tell he's got an investment. This story is pitched by him, this nuclear arms race story. That's something he was interested in exploring. And there's just still a dedication. I mean, this is his fourth time playing Superman, and his performance is
as good as
it doesn't feel phoned in. It doesn't feel like he's just going through the motions. You can tell he's still in, he's still dedicated, and he's given it his all. He's really doing what he can to elevate this. And yeah, there's no question. It's Christopher Reeve as Superman.
Yeah, I mean, of course, gets my Mark Strong award as well. Christopher Reeve as Clark Kent / Superman. And it's not like a lifetime achievement award. It's not like we feel obligated to give it to him. His performance is incredible. The man just lives and breathes the character so well. Like you said, he's not phoning it in. And to the cast credit, they bring back impressively a lot of the original cast.
Mm-hmm.
And none of them feel like they're phoning it in. None of them feel like, oh, this is a $17 million picture. I'm just getting a paycheck.
Right.
They all show up, but Christopher Reeve, I mean, just
right.
We're gonna get into it, but this movie, one of the things it does well is it still nails the characterization of Superman, and you got to owe that to Christopher Reeve. But they really dive into a lot of stuff that make the character special and unique, and you can just tell he has an inherent understanding of what makes Superman special, and just does an incredible job of bringing it to life.
Yep.
Don't want to shortchange his role as Clark Kent as well, because the goofy, clumsy, fish out of water Clark Kent character, he also does incredibly well.
Actually gets a little bit of a Clark centric story in this one, kind of similar to Superman 3, not to that level, but does actually have some stuff to do with Clark here versus some of the previous stuff. But yeah, end of the day, Christopher Reeve is the Mark Strong. There's no question.
Christopher Reeve. So one thing that I really do genuinely like about this movie, I love that he brought that story. And Superman gets both praised and criticized, depending on who's talking about it, about being this wholesome, infallible character that we should look up to. Because there's a way to write that to make it interesting. There's a way to write it that feels boring. It's all a matter of the creators. But Superman is best, in my opinion, whenever he is truly that Boy Scout. And just the idea that Christopher Reeve felt he could use this character to tell this personal story ultimately about world peace and coming together. It's a lot of art imitating life, that he felt like he could make a movie to have a message so strong that it's going to make a difference in the world. And I just think it's beautiful.
It is. And it's actually something that makes the movie, I think it makes the movie hit, for me at least, a little bit more than it otherwise might have, just knowing how passionate he was about it and seeing that he saw this as an opportunity to bring this in as a statement, however effective the final product may have been.
If it was just a story about Superman fighting a monster, Superman fighting Bizarro, like I alluded to earlier, and that was it, there was no additional message or side story or side plot or relation to the nuclear arms, yeah, it would not be nearly as
there's nothing to dive into there at that point. So no, I think it's something that, like I said, is not necessarily the direction people might expect. But I think that Superman, I probably gushed about Superman and Superman 3, but like just that ideal of what society is capable of, basically Superman being the symbol of optimism, that works for me immensely. So these movies are always going to hit in that regard, because especially in this movie, far more than even Superman 3 for sure, and possibly even the others, he's this beacon of optimism. It's not just facing an external threat. It's an external threat, yes, but it's still very much, I'm trying to be a beacon of hope for the world, and I'm actually bringing that across. Like, I'm not just saying I'm a beacon for the world and then just kind of never really doing anything with it. It's saying it and showing it, and to a certain degree of effectiveness.
Gene Hackman returns as Lex Luthor. Andrew, I'm a Lex Luthor pronouncer. How about, it's spelled Luthor. Some people like to say Luthor. Even in Superman the movie, he famously has a henchman that calls him Lex Luthor. Luthor. Andrew, Luthor or Luthor?
Lex Luthor.
Yeah, good. That's right. Margot Kidder played. No, just kidding.
Gene Hackman sits out Superman 3, obviously. We talked about that in that episode. He's brought back for this one. He's playing Lex. I mean,
he does it. I mean, it's not, nothing is to the level of Christopher Reeve embodying Superman, but I like his Lex Luthor. What I think he nails specifically is Lex Luthor's arrogance. He will be face to face with Superman, who is a supreme being in every way, and he's insulting him. He's got quips. He'll lounge back on a couch. I mean, his arrogance is a defining trait of the character. He also has the intellect to back it up most of the time. It's an interesting character. I think he does a good job.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, you're bringing him back partly for the star power. You're bringing him back just because of his history within the series. But I think here he's like I said, he's bringing Lex. He's really good at the way they've chosen to play this character. Never going to be a bad thing to see more Gene Hackman.
Margot Kidder returns as Lois Lane. And again, most of these cast, we gushed about it on Superman 3. However, she was not in that movie too much. She just had 2 key scenes, really, whereas she is throughout the runtime of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because Superman 1 established a romance between the two of them. They expand on it in Superman 2. However, tell me what happens. She gets her mind wiped.
He kisses her and she forgets.
How does Superman have like a power to alter your mind in this movie?
In this movie, yes. Normally, no.
The movies play a little fast and loose with his powers, which it's funny because, again, one of the things that you can either praise Superman for or criticize him for is that Superman is overpowered. He's got every power imaginable. Well, these movies give him even more powers. Also, he'll do things like transform into his uniform magically. Like his clothes will just change into a Superman uniform rather than physically, taking off. Anyway,
he can rebuild walls with telekinesis. He does that at some point in this movie. It's very strange. Like they do play very fast and loose with his powers. There are certain static things, but they definitely add in things. Yeah.
We may get to Superman 4. And they're basically doing a will they, won't they with Lois Lane and Clark Kent. Clark Kent, Superman, obviously still has feelings for Lois. He loves Lois.
Sure.
She can't remember, but there's points in this movie where she does remember, whether it's Superman allowing her to do so with his powers that he has in this movie. There's a scene where he allows her to remember everything and then takes it away. But then there's other scenes where he doesn't do that, but there's still hints that Lois knows that they have a history.
Right.
So it's interesting role to play, but I love Margot Kidder in these movies.
Oh, yeah. She's got the tenacity. She's got the passion, especially in this one, where we'll talk about their characters in a little bit. But the planet has basically taken over by a tabloid mogul. And you can see the passion that she still has about what she does, her disdain for their practices, just all really good stuff. And again, somebody who not phoning it in, really doesn't feel like she's playing it down at all. You can still feel like she's got investment here.
As you just said, the Daily Planet is taken over by David Warfield and his daughter, Lacey Warfield. David Warfield is played by Sam Wanamaker. Now, this man's credits go all the way back to the 40s.
Yes.
I mean, a consummate pro in the industry.
He's playing a media mogul that's just like a tabloid sensationalist, like your National Enquirer type guy who just owns a bunch of newspapers. He throws flashy headlines out to get people's interest. He's talking about how nobody reads articles anymore. They just read headlines. And this movie was made in 87, folks.
Wow.
So, but no, obviously this is a man with a huge career. But one of the things I actually think is most interesting about him is that he directs the pilot of a Western TV show called Lancer. Now, for those of you who saw Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the filming of the pilot to Lancer is actually portrayed in this film as one of the things that Rick Dalton gets to be the villain in. So Sam Wanamaker is actually a character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, played by Nicholas Hammond.
Is that the scene where the young girl compliments him and he gets all teary-eyed? Is that what
it ends with the girl being like, it's the greatest acting I've ever seen. Rick Dalton.
Now, his daughter, Lacey Warfield, played by Mariel Hemingway? Or is it Mariel? Do you pronounce it like Ariel or Ariel?
I would pronounce it Mariel Hemingway.
Mariel Hemingway.
Yes, there is a relation.
Wait, there's a relation to Ernest Hemingway?
She's his granddaughter.
Huh.
the other interesting tidbit.
Yeah, she does a good job in this movie. She's not to
Yeah.
the level of Annette O'Toole in Superman 3 as far as building a new love interest for Clark Kent, but she does a good job. And obviously, you got Lois in this movie, so that's where all the chemistry is going to go. But they do a little bit of a love triangle kind of thing with the three of them. It's honestly kind of a strange role in the movie
It is.
ultimately, but I think she's doing a good job. I was going through her filmography and not a lot of stuff that I recognize. But she hosted Saturday Night Live in 1995, even though I didn't recognize like a single movie she made after this.
Her notable things were probably at the age of 14, she got a Golden Globe for the film Lipstick, and she later got an Academy Award for her role in Manhattan in 1979. But yeah, after that, not a whole lot of stuff that I'm super familiar with. But yeah, it's an interesting role because we get there's this very weird scene in this movie where it's like a double date with Superman and Lois and Lacey and Clark.
Yes.
And Superman is like racing back and forth trying to be both of them.
Like I appreciate that concept, but why would Clark Kent allow himself to get in that situation?
But yeah, it's a very strange scene, but like, so there's a bit of a Lacey Clark romance brewing at the same time. You've kind of got the Superman Lois relationship kind of rekindling as well. Where Lana is, who knows? She got a job at the Daily Planet at the end of 3, but nowhere to be seen. But she gets a bit of an arc here. She starts pushing back against her father's kind of more sensationalist tendencies. Starts saying that we're about journalism. We're not just about sensational headlines. Just really kind of pushing back against it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's some interesting stuff, but it's definitely a very odd balance they're trying to find between Lacey, Clark, Lois, and Superman.
John Cryer plays Lenny Luthor. First off, real quick, is this a character from the comics or made for this movie?
I'm pretty certain he's made for this movie.
Okay. The idea of like an annoying nephew just being named Lenny Luthor, it
feels
perfect.
So, yeah, it's very 80s too. Like it feels like a very 80s concept.
Now, before this, probably most known as playing Ducky in Pretty in Pink.
Yep.
However, these days, most known as one of the men in 2.5 Men.
And also getting his own turn as Lex Luthor.
Really? Where was that?
On the current CW verse, he plays Lex Luthor.
I had no idea, but that's amazing.
In the Crisis on Infinite Earth crossover they had a couple last year, I think he was a big part of that. So an odd full circle from the nephew to the man himself.
A few years after this does Hot Shots, which a movie I like. I think it's come up on this podcast before, but anytime to talk about Hot Shots, I'm gonna take it.
Can't pass up a chance to talk about Hot Shots. But yeah, he's Lenny's Lenny plays Lex's hapless, dim-witted, hip nephew.
Yeah, he is. I feel like we got to say this at least once an episode from on the cast, but he's doing what's asked of him.
Yeah,
which is to play that. And he's like a surfer dude almost. At one point, he says the dude of steel instead of the man of steel.
Like Nuclear Man sends him spinning through the air at one point in the movie. And then like, as he's getting lowered back to the ground, he's like, oh man, I'm breakdancing. This is awesome. And I'm like, what a weird thing to say.
Like that feels like a scene from Hot Shots. That feels
like just very odd. There is a line that Lex says to him early on that I actually did genuinely like laugh at. And he's like, Lenny, I've always considered you the Dutch elm disease of my family tree. And it's just like such an oddly specific insult that I'm like, one, I have no reason to believe this character even knows what that means. But two, also a very Lex Luthor thing to say to sound
it is
superior.
It's a very like Dennis Miller insult, like just too complicated and specific just to kind of sound intellectual.
But yeah.
Mark McClure plays Jimmy Olsen. Excuse me. Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. I guess he never gets to that point.
He never does.
But that, for anybody that doesn't know, was a legit running comic book title.
It was actually part of Jack Kirby's Fourth World books.
And incredible to make Jimmy Olsen the star of a book. It's my favorite comic book title, probably. Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. But Mark McClure, I mean, he's playing Jimmy Olsen. He shows up in all of these movies, never has a very big part. Never
He's
really.
the only guy that's in all. I said this is Superman 3, but he's the only guy that's in all 5 of these Superman universe films, including Supergirl.
Well, I mean, would you say there's 6 movies in this universe? Superman Returns is in this universe, if you think about it.
No.
Okay,
Conversation
no.
over. Oh, no. It's in the. We can talk about the Superman Returns later, but in this run of films, obviously, Supergirl was kind of the outlier. McClure's the only one who comes into that one. And then doesn't mention Supergirl to Superman, seemingly. But
Now, I have
yeah.
not dug through his filmography. Is there high profile things outside of this?
Back to the Future. He plays Marty's older brother.
I can't help with that name. Just think of The Simpsons. Like, hi, I'm Mark McClure. You may know me from such films as Superman the movie, Superman 2, Superman 3, Supergirl, and Superman 4, The Quest for Peace.
Yeah, he's looking at just a quick glance of his filmography. Like, there's some stuff in here, but nothing serious. But not a whole lot of high profile stuff there.
Well, Andrew, I think that covers it for the major players in this cast.
Jackie Cooper also returns as
right.
Perry White.
And I'm forgive me for leaving him off, because honestly, I think this is his best turn as Perry White.
He actually kind of gets something to do.
Yeah. He always has a few key scenes where he's just playing an editor of a magazine, not really important to the plot or anything. But the B plot of this movie, as we've mentioned, is the Daily Planet is taken over by a tabloid magazine. And early on, he's not in most of the movie, because early on he's like, I'm going to do something about this. And he storms out, shows up again at the end of the movie, and triumphantly takes the Daily Planet back over. He does that classic. I see this in movies all the time. He's like, you're a publicly traded company and I bought most of the shares, so now it's my company. I mean, that happens all the time.
It does. The whole idea is like, well, I bought up all the shares because everyone's on my side. And I'm like, it's all, and like, I don't think that's how it actually works.
I don't
know. But yeah, we're not experts, but yeah. So he gets a big kind of.
If I buy enough GameStop shares, I own GameStop. I own all the games inside, right?
Exactly. That's how it works. But yeah, it's a big kind of, big motivating moment at the end that they're not going to let the Daily Planet be taken over by the kind of sensationalist stuff that Warfield is known for. And yeah, he actually gets a little bit to do there. We talked about Jackie Cooper a lot in the last episode, but yeah, just wanted to give him a moment because he does gets a little bit more here than he normally does.
Well, let's jump into the movie. And as always, we're going to start at the top. We're going to go through all the scenes we like in this movie. But the first one we're going to talk about is what we would consider the best scene. When is this movie firing on all cylinders for you, Andrew? What did you enjoy the most in this movie?
The scene I'm going to highlight is a scene I just like because it's just Superman being Superman. It's actually the intro rescue scene in space. Basically, what we have is we've got some cosmonauts in space, and they are some piece of space debris collides with their ship. They're spinning out of control. Their guy that was outside the ship starts drifting away. Superman just flies in. This is also a scene where I feel like the effects, I don't know if it's because it's in space or not, the effects don't look nearly as obvious.
Agree. Yeah.
So you kind of get Superman stops the ship from spinning, catches the guy. Obviously, he talks in space, which is something that never makes sense. But
no, but
no, like
this movie breaks some more rules in space later on.
There's plenty of more rules, but
he speaks in Russian though. He talks to him in Russian.
There's a couple of scenes in this movie where he actually speaks local languages during moments, and I think that's really cool. But yeah, so either way, it's not very long, but we're starting the movie off with just Superman being Superman, rescuing these people. He's in space. He's flying around. Like I said, it's one of the better looking scenes in the movie as far as the effects go. Nothing flashy, nothing over the top. But for me, just the idea of just that, starting the movie off on the note of here's Superman just being Superman, saving these people, doing the right thing, that hits me. And so, yeah, right off the bat, I was like, that's a great starting scene as far as I'm concerned.
That is a great scene. We also get early on him stopping a runaway subway train, which I referenced in the intro of this episode. But it's a very good, like you said, Superman being Superman. This time we're in Metropolis. I believe the driver of the subway had a heart attack of some kind or passed out, something. He was incapacitated. And so it's fun because Lois is on the subway and Clark Kent just misses getting on board. But of course, once we see that the subway's out of control, Superman flies into action, and the way he stops this is so creative and fun. You would imagine he would just fly towards it, grab it, and slow it down, right?
Mhm.
No, he steps on the third rail, which would kill any normal man, but Superman is not killed by the surge of electricity, and it depowers the subway train car that then slows down. Awesome. That's super
Yeah.
cool. It reminds me in Superman 3, I talked about he had to put out a fire. So he flies to a lake. I'm like, how is he going to do this? And he froze the lake and carried the frozen water. This is just a super creative way for Superman to save these people. And this is it's a bit of like your friendly neighborhood Superman moment, because again, his priority is like, I don't want people to think that subways are now unsafe. Tell these people that public transportation, subways is still the safest, most reliable way. Love it. But again, I keep going back to this, but a lot of the things that Superman is praised for are also things that people that aren't so hot on the character will criticize him for. But
Right.
Superman usually isn't about using his fist and fighting bad guys. It's about using his powers for the little man and for the working class and for the good of humanity. And this is just a great example of that.
There's a lot of moments in this movie that are just Superman saving people. And I'm always going to enjoy that. I'm always going to enjoy seeing it, especially as the more cynical kind of nature kind of sets in later. And like, I love that scene where he, like you said, after the subway, where he says that traveling by subway is still like a safe method. He actually brings that back, I think, in Superman Returns after he saves the plane. He says the same thing. He's like, I want everybody to know that flying is still one of the safest ways to travel in the world. And he does the same kind of thing.
Man, I saw Superman Returns once. I remember next to nothing about it. So I'd like to revisit that. Maybe we will.
But yeah, just a lot of scenes. Like there's a scene where like a volcano goes off during his first fight with the nuclear man. And he like cuts off part of a mountain to plug the volcano.
Yeah, that was so.
I
don't think it really makes any sense, but
it doesn't.
It's a cool visual.
But then he flies down and he kind of cools off all the lava and turns to just rocks. But then again, he speaks in the local language to the people. And again, stuff like that's just really cool.
Again, there's a lot of different ways to interpret this character, but whenever Superman sometimes they make him so American, it borders on propaganda. And it goes beyond bordering, but I don't want to get too into that on this podcast. Sure. But it's just the idea that he would be super committed and only committed to American ideals just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I agree.
So I generally love this movie's take on it. He saves people around the world, speaks their language. His home base, if you will, is Metropolis. It's America, but he is literally fighting and committed to the good of all of humanity. It's a theme of this movie. Normally, I mean, he disarms the world of nuclear weapons. He takes them all, throws them into the sun. Normally, you would see a scene of him like going to, I'm using air quotes here, the bad guys' country, and they're speaking a foreign language, and he has to forcefully take the weapons. We don't get any of that. This movie avoids all of that, and I think should be commended for that, for not being racist and xenophobic, which would have been very easy to do with this storyline.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to imagine, I don't know who all to give credit to, but I don't think Christopher Reeve would have let that happen. The writers of this movie didn't take the
easy
low
way
route,
out.
the easy way out, the honestly typical Hollywood way, especially in the 80s, but even still prevalent today. It's great. There's not good American white people and bad, evil foreign people in this movie. That never dips into that territory.
No.
I mean, it very easily could have. And
it absolutely
a lot of respect for the movie for doing that.
You're right. And it's interesting because Superman gives this, originally he's torn. Superman doesn't know if he should get involved to this degree. That's kind of his concern. He's like, I don't think I should do this, because like the elders of Krypton are all just like, you're not supposed to intervene. You're supposed to assist, but you're not supposed to, you need to let them make their own decisions. And one of them even says, it's like, just go to another planet where there's no war. Like,
yeah,
just straight up tells him to leave. It's like, but he's like, no. And so it's that scene where they do the redux of the flying scene from Superman the movie, where he kind of finally understands that he just needs to go with what he feels, and that's to do something. And so he gives this impassioned speech to the United Nations, which that scene is apparently quite was tumultuous because it's not filmed at the actual United Nations, and Reeve and Fury really wanted to film it there, but Canon wouldn't pay for it. So they end up filming it in a adjacent place, but gives this impassioned speech where he's like, I've always kind of been here as a visitor, but I'm not a visitor anymore. He's like, he's got horses in the race at this point, for lack of a better way to put it.
He doesn't, again, he doesn't say like, I'm an American citizen. He just considers himself a person of the world.
Right.
A citizen of the world, if you will.
It's always been interesting because there was a story. Oh God, David Goyer wrote it a couple of years ago. I think it was in Superman 700 or 800 or one of those big anniversary issues. There's like this 7-page story that David Goyer wrote where Superman kind of forcefully denounces being just American and says that he's a person of the world. And I remember it made a lot of waves at the time. It was a lot of people that were very just like, well, what is this supposed to mean? And I'm like, for me, it was like, Superman's always been like a person of the world. Like even stuff like calling it the Justice League of America always felt kind of strange. It's like just America. but like he's always been global. I mean, his Fortress of Solitude is in the Arctic. Like he's already like in multiple places. So this movie really does try to expand that and show him around the world doing things, saving people around the world, and just being Superman on a global scale. And obviously the budget plays into this. Maybe it doesn't look as cool as it could, but like I will always err on the side of a classic Superman. It's always going to work for me.
What I highlighted as my favorite scene, I really like the ones that you pointed out. There's a lot of small, short scenes that stand out.
Right.
What I'm going to go with is whenever Lois comes to visit Clark because he hasn't been showing up to work. Superman is missing. It's because he's been injured by Nuclear Man. And just kind of to provide context for this, we don't know a whole lot of what's happening to Clark. We know that he's sick and injured. There's a scene shortly after this where he's balding and looking really bad. I've got to think there's some maybe deleted scenes that fill in some gaps as far as what this injury is doing to him.
Right. But
the point is he's incapacitated. He's out of action. When she comes to visit Clark, he's sitting on his couch wrapped up in a blanket by a fireplace. The classic, it's like he has a cold. She comes to visit him, and this is one of those moments like Superman doesn't give her memory back or anything, but you get a hint that maybe she knows Clark Kent is Superman. Maybe she knows their history. And she's speaking about Superman to Clark Kent. And she's saying things like, well, if I were to talk to him directly, this is what I would say. In a scene earlier, Superman said that Lois felt like the only person that he could talk to about things. And this is her coming to talk to him. And even though she may or may not know his secret, she's able to give him the right pep talk, if you will, the right motivation for him to continue to fight and ultimately come back from his illness or sickness or whatever it is that's really keeping him out of commission. And Lois, Margot Kidder, just delivers it so well. She literally has tears in her eyes as she's giving him this encouragement. It's a powerful scene. It's not, this movie's famous for its bad special effects, for being low budget, for being hokey, but this is like a genuine, well-acted scene in the middle of this movie that really stood out to me.
I agree. It's a very good scene. So basically, Lex creates this Nuclear Man, and he has a fight with Superman where he like slashes Superman's neck. And I don't know if like you said, there like 45 minutes of footage is cut from this movie, which is odd because that makes it like
over 2 hours,
2 hours and 15 minutes, like makes it a very long movie. But like there was a first Nuclear Man, like that whole subplot gets cut. Like you get a hint of that when they're building out the new one, because Lex says, give me the new genetic material. So like there's some hints, and you can kind of see a few continuity errors pop up. But yeah, I don't know if the implication is that maybe like he's got like nuclear poisoning or something that's like too much sun. Like, because they kind of do that in All-Star Superman, where like he gets he supercharges himself basically and it starts killing him. So I don't know if we're working with something like that, but like he said, he looks rough by like the time he finally like caves in and uses his kind of, they introduced this like get out of jail free card kind of from Krypton at the beginning of the film.
It's like kryptonite, but it's good for him.
Well, it's similar to the crystal he uses to make the first Fortress of Solitude. It's a green
Yeah.
crystal, and he throws that and makes it. But at the beginning of the film, or towards the beginning, it's after that first scene. He has a scene at the farm where he finds his ship. He's selling the farm because I'm guessing his parents are long gone at this point. But there's a big scene where he's like talking to the real estate guy about how he wants a farmer to buy it. But he picks it up and he picks this thing out of ship. And we get a voiceover from Susanna York, who played Laura in all the other films. She comes back to do this. Basically says that like this is the last of Krypton's energy and you can only use it once. And it's kind of very ultimate nullifier-ish. Just like we're not really given like a lot of information on what it is this thing does, but just that like the power of Krypton is inside of it, and after you use it, will be gone forever.
It's a one-time use. Yep.
One time. It's like after this, we're gone forever. Well, thanks.
It's that thing you get in a video game that you hold on to until the boss fight because you only get to use it once.
It's the master ball. But yeah, so he has that, he takes it with him, and then when he's seemingly almost succumbed to Nuclear Man's whatever poisoning, he pulls it out and he uses it. But this is that scene is right before that. And you're right. It's you buy the relationship between the characters, you get the hints of what's happened before. Like I said, you can't be sure that she remembers, you can't be sure that she knows what's going on, but it is a great scene.
That you mentioned that scene at the barn. I really like that scene. And yeah, I read there was a deleted scene where he actually visits his parents' graves. So they are dead. A lot of stuff I like in that early scene, though. He goes to the barn to get the Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, whatever we're going to call it. Yeah.
And no one's around. So he's dressed normally, dressed like Clark Kent, if you will, but he is acting like Superman, which is hard to put into words. Something you just have to see. But his body language and everything about him is just who he really is as Superman. Mm-hmm. And then the realtor's pulling up and you get a very cool visual. We can talk a lot about how the special effects don't hold up, but he looks at the barn and then the barn turns into almost like a wireframe and becomes transparent, and he sees the truck on the other side. To my knowledge, as far as I can recall, this is the first time his X-ray vision has been depicted in that way. They've alluded to it. In the first movie, he like tells Lois Lane what color underwear she's wearing. But you don't have like a visual. Thankfully, there's not a visual of that. That'd be creepy. There's not a visual of how his X-ray vision works until that scene. And I think it looks pretty cool. When he walks out of the barn, he walks out as Clark Kent. Again, dressed exactly the same. He just has his glasses on now. His hair's a little bit different. But his slouch, his body language, his inflections on his voice, he's a different character. And I never get it. It never gets old for me.
Never get tired of that. It's just a genuine... Like I said, Christopher Reeve was highlighted by many as being the person who made you buy believing Clark Kent and Superman were two different people, and
being able to fool people. Yeah.
Right. Being able to like genuinely be so different as the characters that no one would draw the line that they're the same person. And it's tremendously well done.
So he's trying to sell the farm. It's why the realtor's there. He's like, you got an offer, but he doesn't want to sell anybody that's going to use it for anything other than being a farm. He wants to keep that spirit of his parents in the old town, small town life alive. And so he's not going to sell it to somebody who just wants the land, who's going to bulldoze everything. So he refuses the sale.
We don't need another shopping center.
Yeah. And none of this really comes back.
Right.
It's not a plot point, but it does inform the character of Clark Kent, Superman, and his ideals. I love he picks up an old wooden bat. The realtor throws him a ball. He has a hilariously bad swing. He misses the ball because he's playing Clark Kent.
Yeah.
And the realtor makes a joke about it. The realtor also says, you're a long, long way from home, because he lives in Metropolis now. And Superman's like, oh boy, don't I know it. But of course, we're referring to being a long, long way from Krypton. Just a lot of fun stuff here. Of course, after the realtor leaves, he picks up that baseball, he hits it, and the baseball flies into space. Good, genuinely good stuff.
I like that scene a lot because, like I said, you get to see that relationship between Clark and Superman again here. Just the way what the farm means to him and how he doesn't want to give it up unless it's going to be to another farmer. Like the big purpose of this scene is solely to give him the green crystal. That's really the only reason it's in the film. But you could have cut it there. So when they built in this other stuff, it just, like you said, that more just informs the character, and it's really well done. And that's some of the best stuff in this movie is really when I guess it doesn't have to really rely on the effects, and it really is just the performances. You get a real chance at seeing kind of the passion. You kind of see what they were going for. And you really can kind of look past it and see what the greater intentions were here, because this really is a movie that I think you can see what the goal was, but the budget's just holding it back at a lot of turns. And then cutting that footage, I think, just creates a lot of it's like anything. You cut 40 minutes of a movie, you're gonna run into trouble.
It's gonna feel patched together.
It's gonna feel like, and there are, like you said, there's scenes in this movie where it feels like you've just jumped ahead. Like it feels like I just skipped something. And so I think that's something that definitely comes to have an impact on the film as a whole.
But these early scenes, most of the scenes we've talked about so far, except for the fireside chat, is
I mean, you're not wrong.
Most of these things we talked about are early in the movie.
Right.
I mean, saving those people in space, the subway train, the scene at the barn. These are all like in the first 20 minutes. And I'm watching
like the first
movie.
3 scenes. Yeah. Like
I'm watching this movie and I know its reputation. And I'm like looking around at nobody because I'm watching by myself. And I'm like, this is a pretty good Superman movie so far.
Yeah, like, and that's why I was kind of when you text me, you were like, "Yeah, this ain't gonna be hard." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "What?" I was like, and but yeah, you'd only just started it. And those first 20 minutes of this movie, even into like the scene with Warfield, the first scene with him, like you're setting the pace, you're getting things going, and by and large, you're mostly on board. We get
the prison break pretty early on, which gets a little wacky.
Yes.
Because we're introduced to nephew Lenny, who pulls up in this ridiculous looking car. It's got his name written on the side of it. It's got these like horns on the side of the car that face into it.
That are supposed to be like a sound system, but then they put on headphones too. Like it's a very elaborate car.
An elaborate ruse to get the 2 guards that are watching everybody out of commission. They want to hear his sound system, so they hop in the car. Then he uses his tape deck, which is secretly a remote control for the car, to lock him inside. He rolls up the windows.
Such an 80s thing to happen.
Puts the cloth top back on so they can't escape. And then he makes the car drive off a cliff. And this is brutal. This is like the O'Doyles in Billy Madison. It flies off the cliff. It flips upside down and just before impact cuts away. Literally,
yes.
This is the note I wrote down. I said, he murdered those guards. Damn. But as they finish writing that, the 2 guards climb up the cliff and they have like a cartoonish, like if in a cartoon, if the character lit a cigar and it's a trick cigar and the cigar blew up and they had ash on, that's how these guards look when they come up. And Lex Luthor and Lenny are long gone by then. So I added a note. Oh no, they're still alive.
No, yeah, it's like I feel like it's very much something where like I feel like, because you see like black smoke coming up at a certain point too. So I feel like there was definitely a scene where that car just straight blew up.
Yes.
And then they like in post wherever we're like, you know what? Let's not have them kill the guards. And so they specifically put in a scene where you see them still alive. But yeah, it's a very 80s scene. Like the idea of using a tape deck to control a car, just like very over the top. But that's our introduction to Lenny and him freeing Lex from his very low security prison scenario.
To rewind even farther back to the opening credits. The opening credits of this movie are in space, which is where we see the opening credits in Superman 1 and 2. Superman 3 broke that tradition with its wacky opening, but I appreciate being back in space. We're overlooking the Earth. The names are flying through outer space. And it actually segues right into a space scene. We get that rescue scene, which I don't think Superman 1 and 2 did. So it kind of justifies being in space. But what I want to point out here is I wrote these credits down because it struck me as odd. It says we got the classic Superman theme playing, and it says music by John Williams. I'm like, did John Williams do the score for Superman 4? But then right after it says music adapted and conducted by Alexander Courage. Here's what I think happened. They used the classic John Williams Superman score. You hear it in the beginning. And that's where John Williams' work on this movie stops. And the score is done by Alexander Courage. But I guess they wanted that name recognition. They wanted to try to work that in somehow. So that's why the credits are worded. So it's a very strange way to credit the music.
Oh, no, it is. And it's not uncommon because that John Williams theme is used a lot over the years. It's been they used it in Superman Returns. They used it. You get hints of it like in all the Smallville CW stuff.
It's basically in Star Wars.
It's a different conversation for a
The
different day.
same themes.
But it's but yeah, they use it all the time, and so they'll sometimes credit it strange, like they'll be like main Superman theme by John Williams and then music by this person. But yeah, I thought it was very odd because I saw that too. Where it was like music by John Williams, so it sounds like we're using all of John Williams' themes, but somebody else is kind of putting them into new arrangements and reconducting them for everything. Like it's similar to what happens in Superman 3, like where you have some of the themes, but somebody else does the music. But like, yeah, it's a very odd choice of credits there.
A few other things I like about that subway scene. First of all, step aside Infinity War. Most ambitious crossover. Did you see the poster on the subway wall? You got McGruff the crime dog and Smokey the bear together on
with
the wall.
Superman.
And yeah, it's in a Superman movie. Like
that's yeah.
Come
I mean,
on.
you're
80s icons.
Yeah, you're setting up some major potential there.
And he changes from Clark Kent to Superman in a phone booth. I think, honestly, the only time in all 4 movies that he uses the phone booth.
Yeah, I think the first one like makes a joke where he walks up to a phone and it's not a phone.
Which I got to ask you about that. That's the first Superman movie that brought Superman. People were aware of him, but it really brought him to life in the mainstream. How are they making a reference to a known thing of Superman changing in a phone booth? Is it like the Fleischer Superman that they're
George Reeves too. His Superman show would have him do the phone booth thing too.
So what was
show.
that show? It was a television show?
Yeah, it was a Superman show in the 50s, 60s, starring George Reeves, the subject of the not bad film Hollywoodland. But yeah, he's got his Superman show, and yeah, he would change in the phone booth. That's a thing. And then it translated to the comics. And it may have come from the comics. I'm not actually sure what the timeline and all that is. But yeah, the Superman phone booth thing has been, it just always felt like the jump into the phone. Because there's actually a gag in an episode of the Bunkies, who we've established are a big influence on the Beatles.
Right.
Where they are trying to audition for this record company and they end up doing it in a phone booth because they can't get into the building. So they call in and they're literally all set up as a band outside the phone booth. And there's this guy dressed as like Clark Kent, like the full suit with the fedora, keeps knocking on the phone booth, like pointing at his watch, like telling him to hurry up. And they're just like, could you just give us a minute? Like, and so they finally finish and like they finally leave and they're like, and they're disheartened. But then, so the guy like crams into the phone booth and like rips off his shirt. It's got the Superman symbol and he flies off. And I'm like, that's the 60s. So that's clearly making a reference to it then. So by that point, it had to have already been an established.
Well, I guess
Superman.
It's a bird. It's a plane. Is that from the TV show?
That's, I think, from the Fleischer cartoons. Yeah.
From the cartoons.
Huh. And that may have started. My golden age Superman is a little rusty. So it's possible that was a thing. But yeah,
it's
the
amazing
Superman
how like
gag
baked into culture this character is. I mean, of course, he's been around a million years.
Well, that's what's always weird to me is people act like, I think it's something where like he's baked into culture without people really realizing it.
Yeah.
Like I think people are like strangely unaware just how much they inadvertently know about Superman.
Well, yeah, I'm like having epiphanies now because I assumed, Christopher Reeve movie, major motion picture. That's where all stuff comes from. But even in that first movie, they were referencing the pop culture icon of Superman.
Yeah. And so, yeah, there's a lot of, you don't last 80 plus years without catching on somewhere.
Well, his characterization in this movie, we've said it already, but they nail it. Now,
10 out of 10.
The movie is not a financial success, so Hollywood's not going to look to this movie for inspiration moving forward, why they struggle to adapt him again for 20 more years. However, they have a lot of straight up nailing Superman in one line moments. He is referred to as the oldest living Boy Scout at one point. He always does the right thing. I really like the scene where it sets up the young boy riding into Superman because there's on the news, the president's talking about we need to be second to none in nuclear arms because other countries are armed. And the teacher in the entire classroom is obviously scared. She turns off the TV and she is like, what are some actions that we can do? And she suggests writing to the congressman. And one of the boys is like, what's that going to do? She says, well, somebody has to be an optimist, which I think is a great theme for this movie. It's a great descriptor of Superman. And one of the boys has the idea. It's like, well, I know who we can write to. We can write to Superman. He can do something about this. For whatever reason, he writes it to the Daily Planet. I assume because they write articles about Superman often because he lives in Metropolis and just assumes they can get it to the right person. But of course, by now it's been taken over by the tabloid magazine and they take it and run with it. And they want to sensationalize this boy. And whenever they publish that the boy's question and Superman doesn't respond right away, they put out the headline, Superman says, drop dead to kid.
Yeah. Like,
They,
just
this is like sleazy, the worst, TMZ level crap.
Awful stuff. And but that idea of like Superman being the optimist, I mean, that's the truth. He's hope, optimism. And I think that's like, it's always why it's odd to me that like people say Superman can't work in a modern context, especially when like Chris Evans' Captain America is like right there. Like, first off, you have a perfect template of how you do an optimistic character in a cynical setting. But like, to me, that makes it all the more relevant as everything is increasingly more cynical. You can make an impactful story with an optimistic character in the midst of that without having to make it like a period piece or something. Like,
we need Superman now more than ever, I say.
Yep, I agree.
A lot of great, you mentioned this is a very Clark-centric movie. I love his deadpan delivery as Clark sometimes, especially when he's in the Daily Planet. At one point, Lois was supposed to go to France to write a story, and she says something in French. And Clark just asks, when did Lois start speaking French? And just his delivery on that line is fantastic. He also, Lois is going to interview Superman, and she's like, how am I going to ask Superman these questions? He says, politely, I guess. Just perfect.
Just straightforward, like no, just cuts right through.
Yeah, like those aren't I'm probably not doing him justice because they're not like funny lines. It's just his delivery. Knowing he's Superman, playing the character of Clark Kent, I chuckle at almost everything he says as Clark. It's so good.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and I think the Clark kind of gets lost in it because like, his Superman is obviously held up as this like still the bar as far as Superman goes, especially since then. Obviously I don't know how attached our listeners are to George Reeves as Superman. But
which Reeves still... I've got to say it's weird that the most famous Superman were George Reeves and Christopher Reeve.
Yes,
has to be a factor. I would guess Christopher Reeve, the most mispronounced name in Hollywood. Maybe
you hear Christopher Reeves all the time.
Maybe second to Ralph Phineas, but Rafe
Fiennes.
Yeah, that guy. Maybe he gets mispronounced more, but the amount of times I've heard Christopher Reeves, and seen it spelled out Christopher Reeves, it's just Reeve.
It's pretty immense. But yeah, it's he's still the bar, but I think his Clark Kent also gets lost in the shuffle because like he does that bumbling kind of meek introverted character well, but like there are those moments where like there's levity, there's character growth, there's development. He works with it and it works really well. And I think it gets lost in the shuffle a little bit, and it shouldn't.
During the double date where he's got to change back and forth Superman for Lois.
Such a ridiculous scene.
It really is. There's a lot of fun gags.
Yeah.
And talking about playing with his powers, he does a thing where he needs to distract Lois, so he burns the dinner. He first uses his X-ray to see that she's cooking a bird in the oven, and then he heats it up through a wall and a door into the oven. He doesn't burn a hole, and it doesn't matter. I'm watching the movie wrong.
Yeah.
What I want to highlight is in Superman 3, I talked about the scene that I did not know how they did it with the special effects. He jumps into the back of a police car as Clark Kent, comes out the other side of Superman. You can clearly see it's Christopher Reeve in before and after. There's other people in the shot. I don't know how they do it. I'm still mystified by it. And they do something very similar in this scene. In the lobby of the hotel, the camera is inside the lobby. Clark Kent runs out the spinning lobby door, and the door keeps spinning. And he runs out, and we see him in the through a window that's next to the door. Mm-hmm. He jumps into a car, jumps out the other side as Superman. All in one shot, the door is spinning the entire time. This one I think I have figured out. I think they shot him running out the door as Clark Kent, and the left side of the frame where the door is spinning remains that shot, and they splice in a new shot from the right side where he jumps out the car as Superman. I think it's something like that, but it's still very cool, very effective, a nice little touch of using your low budget.
I think so. Well, first off, yes, it's a very good example of that. I think that might be one where one of them is just a double though, because you're far enough back that I think, and I don't think you actually see Superman's face. I don't think you do in that scene. So I think that one would be far easier to potentially use a double in. I'm not saying they did, but
I'm gonna watch it again like 5 times to figure this out.
You're spending more time dedicated to the sight gags in Superman 3 and 4 than probably the people who made them in the first place. But
it's
cool stuff though.
You don't have to do it, but you know, like the door's continuing to spin, but it sells the scene. I like it.
There's a lot of really cool stuff like that.
Andrew, we have to talk about Nuclear Man. It's probably what this movie is known for. You know, you got the bad special effects, and you got this strange villain that is created.
This 80s tastic Nuclear Man who looks
honestly, I like his costume. Yeah. It's strange that he has it. He's like born in it.
There's a whole like thing where like Lex clips fabric into this DNA module he makes to make Nuclear Man, and John Cryer makes the joke where he's like, Lex, I don't think that's going to cover him. And he makes like he's like the computer will weave enough material to maintain the high standards of which I live, or something like that. But yeah, Nuclear Man played by Mark Pillow and Gene Hackman dubbing over the voice there,
which is so strange. He's made from Superman's DNA. I don't know why he sounds like Gene Hackman. There's talks of him being played by Christopher Reeve because it's essentially a clone of him, and they were going to draw parallels to Bizarro. But with them already doing Clark versus Clark or Christopher Reeve versus Christopher Reeve of Superman 3, they went this direction, which is fine. Like I said, he gets that rad costume. It looks just like Silk Spectre from Watchmen. That's what it reminded me of.
It does.
But it looks pretty good. You know, Superman's got like the old school spandex. I mean, like I love the costume. Let me say that up front. But like his like belt and underwear kind of looks like a Halloween costume. And I say that respectfully. That's how it looks.
Right.
This one almost looks a little bit more like a modern costume. You know, we're 2 years out from Batman, which really changes comic book characters on film. You now have to have like a Hollywood version of the suit, as opposed to the little translation that Christopher Reeve is. And that's kind of what they're doing with Nuclear Man. The fabric that it's made out of is a lot more kind of tactile. I mean, dare I say, you're like realistic. Nothing about it is realistic, but it's a different material, and it looks a little bit more like a movie suit.
Yeah, he gets like I said, it's a black and orange costume, has an N on the chest, so you know he's Nuclear Man, and it's the subplot they cut of the first Nuclear Man. He has a much more Bizarro-esque look. He looks a little bit more. He has kind of like the lines in the face,
like a clone gone wrong.
Yeah, a little bit. No, but he still doesn't look like Christopher Reeve, but he's still got that Bizarro kind of look. And ultimately, that leads to the second Nuclear Man, who is, like I said, he's directly powered by the sun, to the point that if he walks into the shadows, he gets depowered.
Yeah.
Literally needs the sun to survive. So he's like Superman.
Just the littlest bit of sun will do. Like Lex reflects the sunlight off of his ring and shines it on him. And that's enough to bring him back.
Yeah. So he's got all the powers of Superman seemingly. And obviously, he's very 80s looking. He's got the big hair, the costume. I think it does have a little bit of a sparkly sequence thing going on there. We've got definitely leaning into the aesthetic of the time.
But you know what? His origin story of Lex putting all the ingredients into a nuclear weapon because Superman's going to throw the nuclear weapon into the sun. That's how he disposes of the nuclear weapons. And that energy creates Nuclear Man. Dude, that's right out of a comic book. That is less realistic than some of the other supervillains that we actually get. So I'm fine with that. It is his look. It's strange. It's weird to see in a movie.
Yeah.
But
it's very comic booky. Very comic book. I'm not necessarily saying any of this is a bad thing.
Now they have some epic fights together because this guy is like as strong as Superman, essentially. as long as he has the power of the sun. And this movie gets really ambitious for a $17 million budget movie. And yeah, it shows most of the time, but like he freezes Superman while they're fighting in space, which again, just like talking in space, I don't know if you can really, in case someone you're already in space, whatever. He freezes Superman and encapsulates him in ice as they're fighting in space. He sets off the volcano. I mean, there's like a big, epic, worldwide super fight in this movie.
Yep.
The budget struggles to keep up, but I appreciate the ambition. I have said for a long time that I think the best Superman fight in film comes in the Matrix Revolutions. After watching this movie, I stand by that. It's still the best Superman fight, but I appreciated that they took the swing at the very least.
Well, yeah, like the whole big final fight like has huge sequences that take place on the moon. And I'm like, that's just a cool Superman thing to do. Because one,
and there's clearly a set, by the way. Again, it's a $17 million budget, but they built like a lunar set, which looks pretty good.
And like there's whole sequences where like Nuclear Man like punches Superman down into the surface of the moon.
Yeah, that was a cool one.
And like they're just going back and forth. But I also just like the notion of like Superman would take the fight away from people. Like, because it starts off, they're in Metropolis and he's causing some destruction, and Superman's like, all right, enough. And they finally kind of break and they disappear and they go up into space and stuff. And I always like that, again, notion of Superman being mindful of his surroundings, going up, kind of doing what he needs to do to kind of protect people as well. I will give David Warfield his moment. As a moment later, Nuclear Man gets an attachment to Lacey Warfield for some reason. I don't exactly remember if there's a reason why that happens. But he like busts into the Daily Planet with the intention of taking Lacey. And to her credit, her scumbag father actually jumps in first to try to save her. And I was like, all right, you get the mildest of points for doing the right thing in a moment of crisis, David Warfield. But ultimately, Nuclear Man still gets her and flies off. Also takes her into space, which she doesn't seem to struggle
fine.
with.
Yeah, that was...
But Superman ends up saving her, and ultimately he triumphs over Nuclear Man by over-nuclearing him?
No, but there's a moment where he incapacitates Nuclear Man. I'm about to embarrass myself on the podcast here. And he does so by putting him on the dark side of the moon, because that gets no sunlight. But after Superman flies off, the sun rises on that side of the moon, and he now is in sunlight and escapes. And I'm watching the movie and I'm like, that's not how it works, right? Isn't the dark side of the moon always the dark side of the moon? There's no sunrises on the moon. So I Googled it just now while you were talking, forgive me. And this, here's what I Googled. Does the dark side of the moon ever get sunlight? And the top blurb says, the dark side of the moon refers to the hemisphere of the moon that is facing away from the Earth. In reality, it is no darker than any other part of the moon's surface, as sunlight does in fact fall equally on all sides of the moon. Andrew, I'm more confused than I was before I Googled that. How does this work?
I don't even know,
the entire moon
man.
gets sunlight? What?
I say it can't
listeners, if you understand how the moon works, send us an email, bestoftherestpod@gmail.com. Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Moon explanation.
I don't understand.
No. Well, because like the moon orbits the Earth, right?
Yes. Yeah, we agree there.
But yeah, so that means that like we're turning around and moving, the sun is still in the center. So as we're still turning around, the moon is still going to eventually get light on all sides of it. Even if a static side is facing the Earth, the outside can still be exposed to the sun just the same as the Earth is. You follow me?
Yes.
Okay. There you go. Because it may be it's the side facing away from the Earth if it's static.
No, Andrew, I understand now. I understand now. Listeners. Okay. Send me that email.
Yeah, send the email.
I don't understand.
Save us from ourselves. I also like that this movie apparently got a comic book adaptation that was drawn by Kurt Swan of all people,
and it included some of the deleted scenes. It fleshed out the story a little bit, which is pretty neat.
And Kurt Swan is like, for many, he's the Superman artist of the Silver and Bronze Age. Just he kind of set the tone for the classic look of Superman. He also notably drew Alan Moore's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, but just great art. And it's always interesting to me when, like, at the time, high profile people, like I think the Batman 89 comic was like drawn by Jerry Ordway, who was like a fairly large name at DC at the time. So nowadays, when there's movie tie-in stuff, it tends to be kind of handled by
lesser,
the third string.
Yeah.
Where in this case, it was like we're actually bringing in some notable people to do this, which I always think is interesting.
Well, after he ultimately defeats Nuclear Man, sends Lex back to prison, he gives this speech. And this movie has a very poignant ending for all of its shaky special effects, which we haven't really talked about the flying specifically, but it somehow #positivity podcast, but it looks worse than it does in the previous movies, which is always strange whenever an effect recurs throughout a franchise, but gets worse. You're moving it's a budget thing.
Yeah.
But the movie ends very strong. It ends with Superman giving a speech again to the world, not as American, but addressing all of society, all of humanity. And he realizes that just by getting rid of all the nuclear weapons, it doesn't magically solve Earth's problems. You still have people with evil in their heart, and they're going to do evil things. You're going to have people like Lex that take advantage of it and try to make a new black market because the old weapons are taken out. It's not going to solve everything. And he gives a speech that says, there will be peace when the people want it so badly, the governments of the world have no choice but to give it to them. And he's saying that he sees Earth as, and all of humanity as one people, himself included, even though he's an alien. And the only way world peace happens is everyone coming together and deciding it. No one man, even if he is Superman, even if he has all of his powers, can do that for the world. And it's fantastic on a lot of levels. In the scope of this movie, I just think it's a nice way to end it, a nice realization for Superman. And in the greater, in the Christopher Reeve delivering a message, it wouldn't be very powerful for Christopher Reeve to make a movie about Superman who solves Earth's problems with his ability, because you can't relate that to the real. It's not going to give us hope. Oh, if we had Superman, we wouldn't be in an arms race. That doesn't say anything.
Right. No.
So ultimately, the message of the movie is a message that we can aspire to and relate to and hope for, that the world comes together and it ends the arms race, ends war, and we achieve or make a stride towards world peace. It's a lofty goal, but a very noble one that I think the movie handles extremely well.
I agree. I think the lesson I take from Superman most of the time is that he's in a representation of humanity's potential. Like, if we put aside all of our issues, the things that Superman can do would be not as far-fetched. Like, if we all came together as a people, we could fly to other worlds, we could move mountains, we could develop a technology in a world that is so far advanced it may as well be Superman. So Superman's stories are very rarely about his powers. They're very rarely about what he can do, because that's not the point. And the best ones you'll find are more like moral conflicts. There are plenty of stories where he fights other people, and those are perfectly fine. They're very good ones out there. But to me, the best Superman stories are the ones where he has to think outside of that. And this is a story where you can see that. Obviously, the notion of removing all the nuclear weapons is a lofty goal, but the lesson at the end is not, I can fix all your problems. It's that you can aspire and you can rise up and you can overcome, and it can be done. And that, to me, is kind of, if you're going to distill the idea to anything, it's that it can be done. And that's why I'll always have a space for Superman above all else, because it feels, sometimes it can feel too earnest, but I would always rather err on the side of being too earnest versus flipping into cynicism or something like that.
Yep.
And it's easy to be cynical. It's tougher to be optimistic. And This is a movie that finds that balance pretty well of giving us a Superman story that's a bit outside the box, but also ending it on a note of only you can prevent nuclear wars. But yeah.
Well, I think that does it for us this week, guys. That's Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. The criticisms you heard about it are probably true and valid. However, there's also some things in this movie that aren't talked about very much, not nearly as much as they should be, like the characterization of Superman, which is extremely good, and
10 out of 10.
And the story's message is I can't criticize that message at all, or even the way that it tells it.
Like I said, it may come off to some as too earnest, but I'll always prefer that to cynicism. And it's, like I said, it's a perfect no. But I think just for Christopher Reeve alone, this movie's worth it. Just to see his performance, see him interacting with the cast, and just see him just still be passionate about this role 9 years later. I think that's still something that's worth watching. So
now, listeners, of course, you can send us emails to bestoftherestpod@gmail.com explaining science to us, and we would appreciate it. You can also send us emails about a superhero movie that you like that was poorly received upon release. We want to know what you like about it. What are the best performances? What's the best scene? Send us your thoughts, and whenever we cover that movie, we will read your email on the mic. In fact, the next movie that we're covering, we bumped up way in the schedule. We plan on covering it, but not for a long, long time. But people kept asking us about Spawn. So next week, Best of the Rest, we are talking all things Spawn. We have a lot of your thoughts to read about the movie. So please look forward to that. Also, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. I'm actually going to make the plea that you leave a review for all of the podcasts that you listen to. It is a free, simple thing that you can do that makes a big difference to the creators. For one, it helps with algorithms and helps the episode get discovered. But two, it's just nice to read. We appreciate it. Like this review left by Agent 25522. What a username. And what they say is positivity at its finest. Love this podcast. It's my favorite that I listen to. Super positive takes on what generally gets hated on by everyone. It's a nice change of pace. Plus, Chris is pretty cute. Wait a minute. Is this my mom? Agent 25522, whoever you are, thank you for the nice words about the podcast.
Guys, I'm pretty cute too.
For anyone that doesn't know, Andrew is the Green Lantern one, and I'm the Joker one. In case
you're mistaken on which one was which, please send in a correction, and we will read it on a future episode.
Send us those emails, leave us those reviews, and follow us on social media. We're everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, you name it. We're there. Come find us. Drop us a line. And remember, maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. It's the only way we're going to grow. We certainly appreciate it. And follow us on Twitter at BOTRcast. Thank you. Hello, and I'd like all the people back there to know that our subway system is still the safest and most reliable means of public transportation. This is Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at superhero movie that was poorly received upon release and only talk about the things we liked. And I got to do that again. I was trying to just go through it, but I got through the line.
You did, and then I killed it for you.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, that's it.
One of the films he directed that I've actually seen is a Rodney Danger vehicle called Ladybugs, which is
that would be Rodney Dangerfield, Andrew. I don't want to issue an apology afterwards.
Did I say it wrong?
You said a Rodney Danger.
Oh, my bad. Wow. I had no idea. I read it as Dangerfield on my screen, thought I said that. And
I mean, that's a cooler name, Rodney Danger, but it's not the man's name.
Either way,